Welcome to the channel. So in our never-ending search for good gluten-free bread recipes, I've got a new one for you today. It's a buttery gluten-free bread. It's golden on the top, it's got a nice crumb in the middle, but is it any good and is it easy to make? I'm Jamie with SavorySaver. I share gluten-free recipes, tips, tricks, and resources to make your gluten-free lifestyle easier. So please consider hitting subscribe and let's get this baked off so we can taste it. So before we get started, let's go over the main ingredient in this recipe because it may not be suitable for some of my celiac viewers. It uses the gluten-free bread flour. This is relatively new from King Arthur Baking. It is a 1-to-1 product, meaning it should swap out evenly for traditional recipes. The ingredients are gluten-free wheat starch, cornstarch, cellulose and psyllium fiber blend, sorghum flour, pea protein, xanthan gum, and enzymes. Gluten-free wheat starch. According to the FDA, wheat starch is gluten-free, but it is not always safe for celiac viewers from what I've seen on the web. FDA says it's safe, but you have to be your own person and know what's best for you. Terry commented on the last recipe that I made using this, saying that they could not use this product. So Terry, thank you so much for taking a moment and leaving that in the comments. We don't have any problems with this, but we're not a celiac home. We stay as gluten-free as we can for my wife, but we do not have celiac. So this product works for us. It may work for some of you with celiac. It may not. Always use your best judgment. Now, let's get to baking. To start this recipe, I like to bloom my yeast regardless of if it is instant yeast or dry active yeast. I just want to make sure my yeast is still alive and working, and I'd rather lose a little bit of yeast and sugar than to lose the entire recipe. So I always do this step first. The recipe does not say that you have to do this, and it is instant yeast, so you don't need to, but I'm going to. I've got 1 1/4 cups of water, or 285 grams, and you want that around 100 degrees. I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of instant yeast. A packet of yeast is 2 1/4 teaspoons. Not sure why they're asking for 2 teaspoons, but in any case, that's what I'm putting in there. I'm also gonna add 1 tablespoon of white sugar. I'm gonna give it a mix, and then I'm gonna let this sit for about 5 minutes, just until the yeast activates and I can see some bubbles. Again, this can all go into your mixer if you want to do it that way or by hand, but I just like to give everything a head start. As soon as this is proofed, we'll move on. All right, it's been about 5 minutes. I've got my mixer out. It does say that you can do this all by hand and that your batter will be a little lumpy. So by all means, don't feel like you need to drag out the mixer if you don't want to. I'm making more dishes for myself, evidently, and it's just a little quicker for me when I'm trying to show you guys. So do whatever works best for you, especially since the recipe says you can do it. All right, so I'm gonna add my yeast and sugar and water to the bowl. I'm also gonna add 2 large eggs, and I just beat them up lightly just to give the mixer a head start. I'm also gonna add 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. I'm also gonna add 2 tablespoons of butter. This is salted. The recipe calls for unsalted. So the salt in the recipe, I just went just a pinch or 2 shy of measuring the salt, just to make sure the bread isn't salty. I don't think it really matters, to be honest. Just make sure it's softened to room temperature. Now let's add our dry ingredients. I've got 3 cups or 360 grams of the King Arthur gluten-free bread flour. I've also got salt, again, just under a teaspoon because my butter is salted. I'm gonna add the flour first. Now I'm gonna add the salt, and that's only because sometimes salt can inhibit yeast. So that way there, as it starts mixing, it'll mix into the flour and disperse before it really connects with the yeast. So I'm gonna blend this just for about a minute to get everything mixed together. If you're doing it by hand, it might take you a couple minutes. If you're mixing by hand, it is gonna probably be lumpier than mine is gonna be. So let's get this mixed up. So it's been just about a minute, and I stopped it about 30 seconds in just to scrape the bowl down. I'm also gonna scrape it again really well now, just to make sure all the flour has been incorporated, because of course sometimes the starches will stick to the sides of the bowl, and I wanna make sure everything's in there. So let's take this off of here. And guys, we're done with the mixer, which is why if you want to do this by hand, I would totally do that with a sturdy spoon, a wooden spoon, or a strong plastic spoon. But there's our batter. So I'm just going to scrape the bowl, get it all down to the middle. We're going to cover it and I'm going to let it rest for 10 minutes before shaping it. It's been 10 minutes. I haven't peeked yet, so let's see what it looks like. Okay, not much different, but the 10 minutes allowed some of those starches to be absorbed by the liquid. So I think that's probably what the main reason for that is. Now we need to shape the dough into a loaf. I've got a standard loaf pan, 8.5 by 4.5, and I've greased it with shortening. Grease it with whatever grease you like. I like shortening for greasing things lots of times. I think the shortening does a better coverage for me. So that's what I've got on here. I've got my silicone mat out, and that's just for easier cleanup so it's not all over my counter. We want to either coat the surface, whatever you're using, either with some kind of oil or additional gluten-free flour. I'm going to use the gluten-free flour and go that route. It worked pretty well for me last time. I've got a little bit of the Pillsbury gluten-free 1-to-1 that I'm going to use. For things like this, I just use a little bit of whatever I have on hand that's inexpensive. I'm also going to coat my hands with it, and hopefully I don't need any more. So let's get this onto the mat. All right, so I've got it on the mat, and the kneading process is different with gluten-free bread using this product than it is with regular kneading. You'd spend 5 minutes kneading it easy when it was traditional bread, but for this, we're just gonna bring it together. The recipe says it should take 5 or 6 times, and it'll be noticeably less sticky. The last time I dealt with this flour, I found it to be about 10 times. But what you wanna do, I'm gonna use a dough scraper. It made it much easier for me last time. So I'll just try to get a little bit of flour on it. It's stainless, so it doesn't wanna do it too much. But what you wanna do is working towards you, you wanna scrape up or use your hands, however you're using it, and you wanna fold it in half. So you're gonna bring it up, fold it in, and I am getting some sticking, but that will change. But this actually, I found it to be really helpful for me. Once you fold it in half, if you need to use a dough scraper, go ahead, but you're gonna rotate it 90 degrees. You're gonna do the same process 5 or 6 times. I did mine about 10 times last time, until it is less sticky, and you will be able to tell the difference, I promise. Okay guys, I did the folding, and it actually, this recipe for me was more difficult than when I made the oatmeal bread a while back. So I did use a little bit of canola oil on my hands, and it actually did better. I can definitely tell that it's come together some, and it is less sticky. So if you make this and do it one way or, and it doesn't work well, definitely try the other if you like the recipe itself, because it may make a difference. Now that I've done that, I've kind of shaped it into a loaf shape because I want it to go in the pan. So I'm gonna lift it up, put it in the pan, and let's see the easiest way to do this. I want you guys to be able to see if it lifts up easy or not. So let's just try it this way. There we go. Not sure if you guys were able to see all that on camera or not, but hopefully I can edit it so you can. Before we proof it, we have one more step we need to do. I've got 1 egg that I have mixed with 1 tablespoon of cold water. I want to brush the entire loaf with that. Now it needs to proof. I like to use my oven for this step. I turn on my oven to the lowest setting for about a minute, and this is usually just before I start baking. Turn it off after that minute, and that way there it's not a full preheat, but it's warm enough for the bread to rise. So I need to cover this up. I like to use a piece of plastic wrap that I have sprayed so it won't stick as it rises. I'm not gonna tighten it down, I'm just gonna loosely cover it. For this to rise, it's gonna be a range, anywhere from 40 to 60 minutes. Since I'm putting it in the oven and it's already a little warm in there, it may actually take less time than that. Once it gets to 1/2 inch above the top of your pan, that's when you want to get in the oven. So the recipe says it's better to underproof a little as opposed to overproofing it, because that could split the bread open at the top. I would start checking your bread, if you're doing it in the oven like I am, 20, 25 minutes in, just to see where it's at. Because if it's close to the top, we want to get it out of the oven and start preheating the oven so we can get it baked. If it's 30 minutes and it's like that, same thing. So last time I did this, it did take around the 40 minutes and it was ready to go in the oven. So I'm going to pop this in there, let it rise. Before it goes in the oven, we're going to do one more egg wash and an additional thing to it, just to make sure the bread bakes like we want it to and not how it wants to. And we'll see how it comes out. It's been 23 minutes into my rise time, and I am up over the top, probably about 1/2 inch, which is what I need. So I just turned on my oven to 350 degrees. I'm gonna let that preheat for a few minutes, and then I'm gonna finish getting this ready to actually go in to be baked. So let's get our final step done so we can get this into the oven. Let's take off the plastic wrap. And the last time when I made the oatmeal bread, I didn't have quite, it was a little smoother on the top. Maybe I didn't roll it into a log smooth enough. So that might be the problem there. So I'm not gonna worry about it too much. I think we'll be all right. So I'm gonna go back to that egg wash that I had earlier. I'm gonna brush it one more time with that egg wash. If you wanted to, you could sprinkle the top of this with sesame seeds. That's one of the suggestions. Or you could use some everything bagel seasoning, would probably be really good on this. Tara is allergic to sesame seeds, so I'm not gonna do that. But I am gonna take a very sharp knife, and you wanna make about 1/4 of an inch deep cut all the way from one end to the other. What that's gonna do is allow the steam to escape through that crack. So hopefully we don't have cracking on other parts of the bread. So I'm gonna do that all the way across. It says to do it swiftly. We'll see how swift I am. That probably was not swift enough. Didn't feel like it was very fast. Now let's get it baked. So you wanna bake this for 55 to 60 minutes. It does say that it may start to brown a lot by 40 or 45 minutes, but that is normal. You wanna bake it from 55 to 60 minutes, and you want it to be between 210 and 212 degrees Fahrenheit to make sure it's baked all the way through. So I'm gonna use my thermometer to do that, and I'll start checking it probably at the 55-minute mark. So let's get this in the oven and see how it does. Okay, let's see where we're at. All right, guys, I'm at 209.5. I am gonna consider this done because it's been in the oven for about 65 minutes. So I think we're good. We may not be. It may be my fault, but we'll see. So now what you wanna do is carefully turn it out onto a cooling rack. I'm gonna upright it again. And now I'm gonna put it onto a cookie sheet. I've got 2 tablespoons of melted butter, and I just wanna brush that all over the bread. Actually, let's pour a little bit too. That's gonna help give it that buttery taste. It's also gonna soften that crust up a little bit. Okay, it's all buttered up. We need to let it cool completely before I can slice it. So I'm gonna let this cool for probably a good hour, 2 hours. Then we'll slice it and give it a try. So bread is done. I've cut a few slices. I've taken some photos. Let's see if it's any good. Got a piece in half here. I do like the outer crust, nice and brown. I do like the interior crumb. From what I can tell, it's all the way through. The bread baked like we wanted it to. You know, the steam escaped out of here, so we actually have 2 sides of the bread. It's not as smooth as I would like. That's a cook thing. I think that next time I make it, it'll be a little better than this shape-wise. In the end, you know, Tara wants a sandwich. She doesn't care what the top looks like. So not too worried about that on the first attempt. Let's give it a taste and see what the outcome is. It's got a good taste to it. It tastes like bread and not like some kind of starch. It's got a good moisture content to it. I'm thinking between the baking and the butter that we put on the top might be some of the reason that's happening. It also has a couple eggs in it, which is going to help retain the moisture. Now let's go over some of the recipe details as far as how easy it is or some difficulties that I had making this. For one, I proofed my yeast ahead of time. So I don't think that's a bad step to do at your house because you're not wasting the whole product if your yeast isn't good. You're just throwing away the yeast and a little bit of sugar or honey or whatever you're sweetening with. As far as the process in making it, everything gets thrown into the bowl and either hand mixed or with your mixer. Super easy to make. I think the batter / dough came together really well. I like that. The 10-minute rest is something that King Arthur recommends when you're using this flour to give everything time to hydrate and start rising. Shaping it, this was a little more difficult than the oatmeal bread recipe that I did, but I did find that it was easier if I oiled my hands down instead of flouring them. So maybe next time, if I'm making this again, I would just start off with some oil. It did finally come together and it was less sticky, allowing me to shape it a little better. Shaping the bread. First time making it, it should have been a smoother top in my opinion, but I think that's on me and not on the recipe. I think I should have shaped it a little better before transferring it to the pan. Rising, mine rose in like 25 minutes. So that is gonna be dependent on your kitchen or wherever you're rising your bread at. So that's something you're just gonna have to work through because everyone's kitchen is different. So you're gonna have to put your baking skills to use when you're baking off bread. Bake time. Mine baked for 65 minutes. I started testing it at 55 minutes. It did take the extra time. Is what it is. 65, 70 minutes. Bake until that temperature's done. You'll get a much better result. After that, cooling it was a breeze. Cutting it, it cut really well with a serrated knife. That being said, if I bend it, you can definitely tell it wants to break. So, in storing the bread, I'm not sure how long that's gonna last because of course, store-bought breads that have gluten in them, you can bend those all over the place. So I'm not sure if that's gonna affect anything in a day or two or not. The recipe does say this will store well wrapped at room temperature for about 3 days. After that, you wanna freeze it. In this house, we tend to try and freeze things sooner rather than later when it's a gluten-free bread. If we're not gonna use it today, maybe tomorrow, it goes in the freezer. Other than that, taste, it has a little buttery taste. It could still use more butter because I don't think that I can get enough butter. But if your family can use this King Arthur Baking 1-for-1 bread flour that they've come out with recently, I don't think it's a bad idea to pick up a bag. I have not seen it in the stores yet where I am. I've only seen it online through their website. I haven't even seen it on Amazon yet. But give me your thoughts on this. Is this a recipe you want to try? Again, is this a recipe you don't try because you're celiac and you either don't trust it or you have issues with wheat starch? Thank you again to Terry, one of my viewers that put it down in the comments on my last video with using this flour that her family can't use it. So not to fear, I am looking at more recipes that would be safe across the board for celiac as well. We all have different allergies. We all have different autoimmune issues. So some videos work better than others for each of you. I appreciate you guys watching them though, whether you can make it or not. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the next video.